Hey everyone, we are here live on Facebook and Instagram. Just wanted to talk this week about encouragement, what it looks like from Jesus, what it looks like that we see in Scripture. And Jesus confronts and he rebukes many times in Scripture. And it seems like when he points out the mishappen pieces, he calls things that are evil evil, and he directs a person to give those things up. But can you think of a time and the type of people he typically does this with? And it's a warning to people like me who are those who call themselves shepherds, those who are overseers, those who are in the ministry, doing the work of the ministry to equip others. And the truth is, Jesus reserves his harshest rebukes for the Pharisees and for hypocrites who are stubbornly set on seeing themselves as righteous. Because we all should know that none of us have it all act together. None of us have everything going on that we should. And we know this and we see this in life because people refuse to see sometimes when they don't have their act together. I was talking to a friend about some of these things, and when should we encourage? That sometimes is the harder question. And this friend I was talking to, he was speaking from just an experience in his life. He was trying to figure out how to talk to his wife about something and encourage her during a moment that they had where they were kind of having some in-house fighting. And the whole ordeal came out of whenever the husband was asked by the wife, who had came across their daughter's journal earlier in the day, and she read it. And the teens, that the one that the wife had looked through the daughter, that daughter had been careful in how she talked about her mother in front of her, but and then other things that she was writing in her journal, what she was doing or thinking, and some of those things upset the mother. And so she was like, man, she's talking this way to me, not in ways that she really means, but her journal is revealing something else. And this friend of mine went on to talk about how in the past, something like this would have set the mother off. Like she would have read this and just confronted the daughter immediately and said, how can you be doing these things? And you told me these other things, and everything in this is showing something else. And she would probably had an outburst that talked about how, you don't love us, and we work to care for you, and this is the kind of thanks we get. These are your real thoughts. This is your real heart. And of course, if we were all transparent as we possibly could be, people would be surprised what sometimes our real heart is on the matter of things, right? I mean, could you imagine a mother that's sees and reads these things? She's thinking, man, I just want her to just get out of the home. But this time, however, the mother did not attack, did not go after the daughter. She held her tongue. More than that, she stayed engaged with the needs of the family. She helped them with homework and made dinner for everyone while she waited for her husband to get home. And so during that time, she was trying to get her thoughts together on what to do with what she found. And this was real growth for her, right? I mean, this was encouraging. Yet her husband was still concerned about what the wife had done. And some of the reason for that is because he disagreed on whether reading a child's diary is okay or not. And obviously his wife, she didn't have a problem with this, right? Because she just went and found that journal. But previously, the husband told the kids, hey, one good way to work through your feelings, your thoughts, is to write them down. And to work through the way the kids can learn what they're feeling and start figuring out how to handle it. And so the husband believed that if the mom and dad took what the kids wrote and threw it back in their faces, then they would be punishing them for what their kids had already been told to do to process things. So what we begin to see in this story, though, is how tangled life normally gets. And I'm sure this happens in your home every day, right? And somewhat it kind of does in mine in some ways, right? You're regularly handed situations in which you see a mix of both good and bad. It's not always just clear. And here the husband's truly grateful for the way his wife is growing. In fact, she fought against her pattern of flipping out on the kids. That would have generated another relational crisis between them and her. That would have been so easy for her to for her to get hurt and just react, right? Because of what she read. But she controlled her reaction in order to serve her family and to ask for help before attempting to deal with the situation. And yet, she had never read the journal in the first place. There probably would never have been an issue, right? So that's where the good and the bad that you see in the situation, especially since what she read was 4 to 5 months old, and it didn't reflect how her relationship with the daughter had been steadily improving over the previous months. It's confusing, it's confusing for the husband to sort out that he had to pay attention to and what he should say. But here's what I'm getting to. If we could back up for a moment to get to the bigger picture, okay? The bigger picture in this is it seems that there's lots of situations that are like this. They come with elements that are really good as well as things that are wrong. And life hands you these tangled knots, and then you have to say something that's going to call attention to some of the elements and not the others. And in case you're wondering, some of these things that I'm getting quite a bit is from it's from a book on parenting by grace by William Smith, and he talks about these things. But one of the figures that he wants to focus on in this, of how to answer that question of how do we encourage through the tangled knots of life, call attention to some elements and not to others. And he goes directly to Jesus, because Jesus, how he would reserve the harshest rebukes for some of the hypocrites. We get to places later in Scripture where, on the other hand, like the Apostle Paul, he opens his first letter to the Christians living in Corinth by lavishing praise on them. I mean, he calls them saints. He gives thanks for them because of the grace of God that was given to them. He talks about how they've been enriched in their speech and knowledge, such as they're not lacking any spiritual gift, right? So think about it, these are the religious ones. And these are people who say they're followers of Christ. And if he ended the book there, Paul would end the book there, we say, hey, we're tempted to say these are wonderful people, outstanding people that you'd love to invite over for dinner. But then you read the rest of the book and discover they're a mess. They have divisions and rivalries among them. They splintered the church into several different factions. We see that in 1 Corinthians 3 through 4. They tolerated a kind of sexual immorality that non-Christians wouldn't. That's in chapter 5. They filed lawsuits against each other. That's in chapter 6. They went from being praised by Paul to showing that this entanglement, this web of things that we sometimes see in this life, how there's these tangled knots of good and bad, is coming to fruition. And so they can't figure out how to think about food sacrificed to idols in chapter 8. They don't sound like people to whom grace has been given, like what Paul talks about, or who are enriched by knowledge. They certainly don't sound like people you should say such encouraging things to, like Paul did. So here's the question. If we backed up and asked, what's the difference between the Pharisees and the Corinthians? What's the difference between the Pharisees and the Corinthians? And here's what I see. One group arrogantly refused to listen to godly counsel, while the other, for all their sins and errors, demonstrated a softness in their spirits. It's the same thing that the mom who didn't just go and lambaste the daughter, didn't just go and make her felt like she was put in her place and damage her in the sense of, I've read through your journal, I read through your private stuff, and instead she had a softness to her spirit. And in even the second letter that Paul writes to the Corinthians, he commends them. After all those things that I just said to you, he commends them for having responded to his earlier letter with humble contrition and repentance. And, that's really something that's amazing if you think about it. They weren't a hardened group of people, so Paul had no problem beginning by encouraging them. And here's the thing that my buddy told me, and he was asked this in counseling. So what do you see? He was asked this question. What did you see when you were going through that process with your wife, and they were, his wife was looking at the journal and things like this, and about the diaries that she looked at? Was there a hardness or a softness in how she went forward? And he said, honestly, he saw a softness there because she responded with self-control and continued to love their daughter. And so here's the thing. If you want to lead with encouragement in this life, there may be things to correct. Paul certainly did with the Corinthians later on, right? He corrected things. But he started by pointing out the positives. If in each Christian there is a combination of sinful nature, which there is, and which we struggle, and there's this active Holy Spirit at work sanctifying us, then I expect to see evidence of both. And I'll probably see both in the same situation, right? That means I can be just as effective by encouraging growth in godliness and holiness as I can by confronting and rebuking sin. Now, this is good. This is from William Smith. Listen to these words. You may even be more effective being the person that is encouraging growth in godliness because of this. These are amazing words. Christians are in the process of being perfected until one day only goodness will remain. You're destined for never-ending eternal holiness. Sin, however, has a shelf life. God's people only wrestle with it internally during this lifetime, and then it will be gone. So when you engage God's children, where do you want to invest your time and relational energy? Into dealing with something that won't survive the next 100 years, being sin? Or into something that will robustly be alive and well trillions of years from now, being our goodness, being as we're in the process of being perfected. And so when we're in heaven, only that goodness will remain and sin will be gone, and that will be alive for the next trillions upon trillions of years. I want to get better at urging people to grow into what God has planned for them, into the goodness, into the being more like Christ. So once again, hear that. Christians are in the process of being perfected until one day only goodness will remain. You're destined for eternal, never-ending holiness. You're destined for never-ending eternal holiness. Sin, however, has a shelf life. God's people only wrestle with it internally during this lifetime. So invest in bringing out the goodness of people, engaging God's children in that way, spending all your relational energy in that, not always rebuking somewhat the very thing that will be dead and gone in the next 100 years. And we see that with Paul once again. Now, think about this. It's true that when this is easy when the other person wants to live rightly, right? When we try to draw out goodness. I mean, encouraging a Pharisee simply reinforces his own sense of superiority sometimes, right? And working with someone who has no interest in holiness calls for a different approach. But if you are talking to someone who has at least some interest in godliness, who shows some willingness to hear, then practice becoming an expert at using words that encourage. You hear that? If you're talking to someone who has at least some interest in godliness, who shows some willingness to hear, then practice becoming an expert at using words that encourage. They're the antidote to criticism and sarcasm. I mean, think about it this way. I had a friend that he played baseball. He wasn't very good at baseball. And when he got older, having kids, his middle son loved playing baseball. And then that dad got drafted to coach on one of the teams. But the only problem was that he knew next to nothing about baseball. And when that son was coming up, 6-year-old playing, his mind went back to when he was 12 years old and he decided he wanted to play Little League baseball. that meant 6 or 7 years behind everyone else because he just started when he was 12. Everybody's been playing, and he was put in the league with only 12-year-olds he talked about. But what comprised of kids who had already played on other teams and who had been doing so for years, and being that he had never been on a regular team, never got any kind of practice, and just showed up for the special league games, he'll never forget his first time with the bat. He talked about how he was standing at the plate and he forgot everything he was supposed to do. He forgot that he was supposed to look for batting signs from the coach. Not that would have meant anything, because if he looked for them, he would have known what they meant. And he forgot to check out the catcher's way, get out of his way when you throw back the ball. So the pitcher and the catcher had to gently nudge him every single time to throw the ball back to the pitcher. And he suspected everyone just standing in the stands thought, looking at his swing each time. He said, "I'm sure they judged me." And just from that experience of playing baseball, and when he ran even hard on a defensive play, he talked about trying to catch a pop-up, and he watched it drop 2 feet in front of him because he thought the shortstop was going to get it, who backed off to give him a chance, but he didn't catch it. And so nearly 30 years later, this is impacting him, coaching baseball. And they asked the coach, go coach first base. He thought to himself, all right, this is a good start. I know where first base is. So he heads out. Remember, his son's playing, his 6-year-old son. And this dad's very self-conscious. He's got an official team shirt on, and which made him feel like he was committing some kind of fraud every time he put it on. He's like, me, a coach, me doing something for baseball. And at this time, he was only discovered that coaching 6-year-olds meant that he was essentially a cheerleader. He stops and he talks about this, and so this friend, as he was saying these things, he would say things that it was real simple, the things he had to say to 6-year-olds, like he would just have to smile, and as they stepped nervously up to the plate, or he would clap for them, let them know that he was pulling for them, and when they started getting anxious, and he called out, here we go, you can do this, right? He told them to calm down as he made a soothing kind of motion with his open his hands held out and palms aimed at the ground. Just calm down, right? And he would caution them that they should pick their pitch, and if they swung wildly, or when they hit the ball, he yelled like crazy, run, come on, all the way through, good job. And everything was ended with a celebratory high five ritual, and as they proudly stood on the bag. But something amazing happened. They started talking to him. He said through encouragement, they would tell him about their experience of batting, what it was like, what they were thinking, how well they hit the ball, or how afraid they were going to strike out. And then slowly, from the encouragement, from saying that he cared about them, what a relationship in the sense of, there's more to you than just your worth as a baseball player. You have worth and dignity in just who you are. The conversations began to drift. They started pointing out a friend from school who played on another team. They told him what they were doing earlier that day, or what they were doing later. They let him know that they couldn't make the next game because they would be on vacation, how excited they were for that vacation. They told about the cuts or scrapes someone got, or what happened to them at school. And these are 6-year-olds, but they're feeling someone who actually cared enough to talk with them, to encourage them. And so here's the deal. The coach didn't really know a bunch about baseball, but these kids knew that he loved them and cared about them because of the way he talked to them, the way he encouraged them, and what they were doing. And from that experience, they opened up, they reached back, and a relationship was built. See, there are skills you can learn and develop to become better at encouraging. But here's the bottom line. It's not rocket science. Encouragement is not beyond you or me, nor is it something that we can't afford to think is not that big of a deal. In fact, it powerfully affects others and dramatically opens up relationships. So think about this. Encouragement, it's going to take time. It took time even for Jesus on this earth, how he encouraged his apostles, those who were following him. There's a story of a guy that years ago he worked in a computer company. He was one of the engineers. This guy would boast about his appliances and furnishings in his house. And after talking long time to different employees about how beneficial each one of his appliances were, and he would conclude to them, I won't have anything in my house that won't pay for itself. Think about that. He said, I won't have anything in my house that won't pay for itself. Yes, he was young, he was full of himself, but still, I mean, I cringe just even thinking about that. I'm wondering how his attitude will one day be towards a future wife or children, right? I won't have anything in my house that won't pay for itself. And I know some of you just laughing, thinking about that, who have kids or have a significant other, right? You can't create some kind of positive context for relationships by evaluating whether someone is paying you back enough. And you're completely deceived if you think you can live a life always looking to get back at least what you spent and not have that attitude spill over into your relationships. Think about how Jesus did that. I mean, similarly, what this some of the things we're reading from William Smith here, and things we're talking about from Scripture, what's jarring here is the feeling that this author points out years later. There's a bumper sticker that was seen on a car, on a van, in front of this author that talks in this book, and he says that the van sticker said, "Nobody rides for free." Nobody rides for free, along with several payment options. So clearly the person who made the sticker and the one who felt they should display it had no problems, no qualms about boldly proclaiming that a relationship with them was always going to cost the other person more than it cost them. I mean, have you been around those kind of people? The type that it was always going to cost the other person more than it will cost them. I mean, would you want a relationship with any of these people? No. I mean, why not? Because their words have communicated that you're not worth their time unless you bring enough to the table to make up for what you cost. Let me say that again. Their words have communicated that you're not worth their time unless you bring enough to the table to make up for what you cost. But here's the beauty. God communicates something totally different. This comes from Revelation. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. Think about that. A day is coming when God's deepest desire will become reality. His people will all be together, living with him, and he with them, forever. He's not satisfied with just grabbing a couple hours with you here and there in some haphazard kind of way. Jesus is arranging for a future with you that stretches far beyond any horizon you can imagine. Think about it. He wants you. And get this. He doesn't keep that knowledge to himself. He doesn't think, if anybody found out that I wanted them, what would they think of me? No, he wants you. He makes sure with simple words that you know that he wants to spend not just a little bit of valuable time, but he wants to spend all of it with you. Now, who do you think stands to benefit most from that arrangement? You or God? Right? These people who think, I'm not going to have a relationship with someone unless it costs them more than it costs me. Jesus didn't think that way. Jesus made it so the cost was infinitely more on him. And so, whose cost is this really taking on? Who's in this arrangement? You or God? Well, obviously, if God had to be paid back for what he puts into the relationship, then he couldn't spend eternity with you because you couldn't afford him. You see that? Jesus makes sure with simple words that you know he wants to spend not just a little bit of time, not just a little bit of valuable time with you, but he wants all of it with you. So if we ask that question, who do you think stands to benefit most in this arrangement, you or God? Obviously you will. Because if God had to be paid back for what he puts into the relationship, then he couldn't spend eternity with you because you couldn't afford him. So how are you feeling about your relationship with him? Really, if you just think of it in that way, that he didn't have to give any valuable time, but he wants to give all of his time to you for all eternity. Shouldn't you start to feel a little more encouraged, a little more built up as a person? If so, it's because he lets you know that he wants to be with you. It's just like that baseball coach that was being encouraging to his players. He was saying, I want to be with you. I want to care for you. I want to love you. I want to know more about you. Was because their worth was more than just a game. And your worth is more than just this allotment of time in this life, because God shows, I want to spend more time with you. Our modern world, it pushes against valuing people. We tend to race around constantly relating to people, but in ways that are shallow, because we're either too busy or too wrapped up in what we want from someone or what we're trying to get done. And here's the thing. There are so many people that they work so hard against this shallowness. And I see it in relationships, especially marriages, where maybe a wife, she'll work hard to push against that shallowness by letting someone know with just the worth of their time, hey, I want to be around you. You know, I've, of course, counseled people from being a pastor, and I can remember this one husband and wife, and she would ask her husband about what happened with his day, and she really wanted to know. And the husband looked back a number of years ago after dinner one night. She asked, how has the day been going for you? And immediately on cue, it's like the kids barged in, they demanded attention, each wanted something different, and they were overwhelmed by the onslaught of just how brushing, they didn't brush Sally off with all the stuff that was going on, but the father didn't want to go into detail about his whole day, and so he just kind of said, hey, I'm fine, my day was fine. But fine wasn't good enough for the wife. She wanted to show she's not willing to just let shallowness happen with time, with valuing time with her husband. And so when they settled the kids, she pursued that same conversation and asking specifically, hey, how did your meeting go this morning? She then left what she was doing in the kitchen, walked over to where the husband was sitting in the living room, settled herself next to him, and gave full attention. But here's the real evidence that the wife cared. She wanted to know and relate to the husband so badly that she wasn't deterred by the distractions that felt really for the husband too much trouble to overcome when he said fine, everything was just fine. She was determined to spend time. And when she spent the time, that's when the husband was able to open up, responding to someone who was clearly saying that you are worth my time. That's encouraging. Think about that. That's what Jesus does with us. He doesn't have to spend time with us. He didn't have to come and pursue us. All the rebellion, all the ways that we go against him that could cause him to say, you know what, I'm just going to leave you to yourselves. Instead, he pursues, and by the way he pursues us, he says, you are worth my time. Now, that should encourage you today. And you see this, you even see this dynamic in families with kids, right? Sometimes they need that mom to proactively pursue or intentionally carve out time for them and communicate through that time that they're special and important, right? I mean, I've even come home thinking about, one of the kids during my day. I got two. I got Titus and Judah, and go and search for them till I find them, right? And usually they come and greet me at the door, but, I can even think coming through the door, I'm thinking about, what today is, telling them, and they might tell me, oh, it's Wednesday. But I'm coming through the door thinking, no, right now, it's Titus Day. Like, I'm about to pick you up and throw you in the air. And he'll always, after I throw him in the air, he'll mess with me and say, tickle me, and he, and that big grin in response. You know what it suggests? It suggests, I care about you. And you're showing that I'm worth your time. And once again, to my kids, I'm one of the most important people in their lives. I mean, they don't know many outside of me. I mean, they know church members that they come across people, but to them, that moment, I mean, could you imagine just dismissing someone who, or being dismissed by someone that you would say is the most important person in your life? And so at other times, right, we're ready to be reactive, to drop. So there's proactive and there's reactive, and we got to be ready to be reactive, to drop what you're doing for the sake of relating to a person who feels a need to talk in the moment. And that is harder for sometimes me. I think about it, but so important. Just I think for one of my children, and you think through this life and experiences we have, and maybe there's times that you feel like, it's been a heavy day. You're not ready to just be reactive. But I can think of friends that have told me when they've gone through a lot in a day, especially one who deals with sports, and let's say there's an important athletic event that he's dealing with. He gets home, he spent so much time with his friends already, or during the week, and or a weekend away with because he participates in youth group stuff, and when he comes through the door, he tells me when he's done with those kind of weeks, he's tired, and to press him when he comes to the door, or he's not ready to talk. But there comes a point. And I've learned this just being reactive with people too, that sometimes when they're ready to talk, I gotta be ready to put down things and just listen, because I'm not going to get another chance. I'm not going to get another opportunity. And I have brothers like that. I'm sure you have people in your life like that. That those are the type that you put down your book, you turn off the TV, you don't grumble, you don't interrupt, you pay attention because it's important. And they might not give you another chance to hear them. And, here's the thing. Every single time I've done that, it always has been, always worthwhile. And I'm always glad, because in those moments, it's like I was included in their world, and they said, you included me in your world. So it seems strange, but those small interactions have big effects. And after being, and Jesus did this the best. He was both proactive and reactive in very God-honoring ways that drew out the goodness of people, and still rebuked when people wouldn't want to hear truth that could change their lives. So here's what we're seeing is that often, young people seem calmer and more secure because they know that they've been reminded, and this isn't just for young people, it's for everyone, that they count. When people are appropriately proactive and reactive, we're reminding them, and we're securing them in the fact and calming them down their hearts that they count. One of the pastors I heard at some point said that quality time is an accident that comes out of quantity time. In other words, guys, you can't generate a quality time experience. It requires not just your participation, but you think about it with even a child. You can't force it. You can't say, okay, get ready, we're going to have a meaningful interaction starting now. You can't force meaningful interaction, but you can make quantity time happen. You can loosen up your schedule. No one on their deathbed ever looks back wistfully and regrets not having put in more time at the office. No one looks back wishing they'd run the vacuum cleaner a few more times. No, what they regret is not carving out time with the people around them. And Jesus did this best. He engaged people. He knew carving out time for people was so vital. And so those quantity times create context in which a meaningful interaction often take place. So I want to end with this. If you want to encourage people in your life, if you want to encourage your children, if you want to encourage people around you, think outside of pre-planned, rigidly structured schedules and events. And then just invite them. Take time with them, or more accurately, let them take your time. You hear that? Not just take time with them, but let them take your time. Or even better yet, gift them with the time God has gifted you, because you don't know what tomorrow brings. Gift them with the time that God has gifted you. I hope this has been a good, another good week. Things you got stuff from, but just remember, take time with them, or better yet, let them take time with you, and gift them with the time that God has gifted you. Thanks.